Your Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening and a warm welcome to Bhutan Climate Action Conclave 2022. I'm Kezang Yangdin, Program Specialist for Climate and Energy Program in WWF Bhutan and the MC for today's event. To begin, may I invite Ambassador Kezang Wangdi, Chairperson of the Snowman Race Board, to present the welcome address.
There are heroes who make us proud. There are heroes who make us feel good. Here we have 29 ultra-marathoners who make us both proud and feel good. Thank you for being ambassadors for climate action and joining the call to save the planet. Her Majesty, the Queen of Bhutan, patron for the environment, Limbo Dr. Tandin Dorji, Honorable Foreign Minister, Chief Guest, Azusa Kubota, Resident Representative, UNDP, Mr. Michael Phillip, Member of the National Council, WWF, Mr. Dichin Dorji, Senior Director, WWF US, Dr. Pema Wangda, Executive Director, Bhutan for Life Program, esteemed members of the Snowman Race Board, Race Director, Mr. Luis Escobar, and our amazing snowmen racers that are in the front row here. Distinguished officials from Bumthang District and Uge Wanchu Institute for Conservation and Environment Research. Eminent speakers, ladies and gentlemen. It is my privilege to welcome you to the first Bhutan Climate Action Conclave held at the successful conclusion of the Snowman Race. Both held in beautiful Bhutan, Bumthang Valley, where nature and spiritualism thrive. The Snowman Race draws inspiration from the prescient wisdom of His Majesty the King of Bhutan on conservation of natural and cultural heritage. It was envisioned with the noble purpose of highlighting the grave impacts of climate change on the lives of the people, particularly living in the fragile mountain ecosystems. The Himalayas is reported to have tenfold acceleration in ice loss, which far exceeds any centennial scale rates of change that have been recorded anywhere else in the world. In Bhutan, glaciers are observed to have shrunk by 22% between 1980 and 2010. Glacier lakes consequently have grown by 8%. It is alarming that the disappearance of glaciers threatens the very ways of life of communities that has been living amongst them over the centuries. Glaciers took eons to form and are now melting at an unprecedented rate. And glaciers in the Himalayas are vanishing faster than anywhere else. The melting of glaciers increases the risk of glacier lake outburst flood, which are often related to as the silent mountain tsunamis that threaten lives downstreams. As of today, there are 17 potentially dangerous glacial lakes identified in the country. Further, the increase in temperature predicted to about 1 to 2 degrees Celsius in Hindu Kush Himalayan region by 2050, and changes in precipitation will have a major impact on the availability of water resources affecting agriculture, energy, and economy of the most vulnerable people downstream. The urgency to act to halve the emissions by 2030 and limit the global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius has never been more critical. The top 10% of the world contribute 50% of the annual emissions as compared to the bottom 12% accounting for the rest. Climate action, therefore, has undeniably a moral dimension for us to act and in concert just now, right away. Over the last 5 days, we saw for ourselves 29 incredible individuals from various parts of the world gather for the first edition of the world's highest ultramarathon race through the spectacular yet remote highlands of Bhutan to raise awareness on the impacts of climate change in this region and beyond. and call for accelerated climate action. We salute each one of you. Reinforcing the same message of global climate action, we are gathered here to deepen our understanding of climate change impacts through conversation with the experts and through the stories of some of our snowman race runners. The Conclave will deliberate on the solutions needed to reduce the vulnerability of the mountain communities that hopefully will resonate with the discourse of the world leaders at COP27 early next month on strengthening climate resilience, especially of the mountain communities. It is only fitting that we hold this conclave here at the Ugyen Wangchuck Institute for Conservation and Environmental Research, which is a premier institute in the country focused on science-based research to inform environmental and conservation policies in the country. In concluding, on behalf of the Snowman Race Board, the National Environment Commission, Bhutan for Life, UNDP, and WWF, who are the convening partners for this conclave, I take pleasure in welcoming you to this conclave and thank you for joining in this urgent call for climate action. Tashidele.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your welcome address. I'm honored to share that Her Majesty the Gelson, the Queen, will grace the event with a royal address. Her Majesty the Gelson is the royal patron of environment.
Good evening. Over the last 5 days, people in Bhutan and around the world have watched with great interest and even greater admiration 29 women and men taking part in the first ever snowman race. Congratulations to you all. This was by no means for the faint-hearted. You have worked and trained incredibly hard for this, and to His Majesty and me, you are all winners, and we couldn't be more proud of you. I also want to use this opportunity to thank all the organizers, health workers, their SUPs, armed force personnel, international production team, radio operators, timekeepers, and volunteers who have worked tirelessly, often through the night, to ensure that the race was a success and that at the end of each day, all our runners were comfortable and safe at camp. Thank you all. I remember many years ago when His Majesty first spoke of starting the Royal Highland Festival and the Snowman Race. His Majesty travels the length and breadth of Bhutan and has spent time in some of the most remote pockets of our country. Both the Royal Highland Festival and the Snowman Race were born out of His Majesty's love for the people living in these remote communities and the nature that surrounds them. These are some of the most remote villages with a simple way of life that has remained unchanged for decades. The people who live at the threshold of melting glaciers contribute the least to climate change, but are the first to see its devastating impact. Inspired by His Majesty's vision to protect our environment, the majestic mountains, the fragile glaciers, the pure air and the pristine forests that lie along its trails, the Snowman Race highlights the impacts of climate change and the urgent need for global action. Climate change is real and affects everything on our living planet, from human beings to flora and fauna spanning land, air, and water. We are witnessing extreme weather events on a global scale, which we can only expect to become more severe, devastating countries and communities all over the world. The increase in the intensity and frequency of natural disasters like fires, floods, and droughts are affecting the world at large. Countries like Bhutan, with the smallest carbon footprint, are facing the grave consequences of climate change. Our glaciers, which are the world's freshwater reserves, sustaining billions of lives, are fast disappearing. Bhutan has 567 glacial lakes, of which 17 are potentially dangerous due to global warming. The 1994 glacial lake flood, which caused so much devastation, remains fresh in our memory. Climate change, along with unsustainable economic growth and consumption, continues to accelerate biodiversity loss at an unprecedented rate. The 2020 Global Living Planet Index shows a 68% decrease in vertebrate population between 1970 and 2016. Many of these changes are irreversible. This climate action conclave comes at a crucial time when global reform, shared commitment, and joint action are urgently needed to address the rapidly escalating climate crisis. The toughest challenges require our greatest effort. Our hope is that all participants, athletes, experts, and climate champions will be able to share their experiences, their expertise, and ideas for all of us to collectively join hands in our fight against climate change. You have shown tremendous strength and endurance to make the first edition of the Snowman Race a success. Let us carry the same spirit of courage and determination to address the climate crisis, for the survival of our planet and humanity is what is at stake. Thank you all and Tashidale.
On behalf of the convening partners and the participants, may we submit our deepest gratitude to Her Majesty for gracing the event. Now may I invite Honorable Limbu Dr. Tandin Dorji, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Chair of the National Environment Commission, for a keynote address.
Her Majesty the Gelsun, the patron of the environment, fellow keynote speakers, Tashos, climate action ambassadors, our athletes who participated in the Snowman race, friends of Bhutan, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm greatly honored to join the other illustrious speakers to speak for the first Bhutan Climate Action Conclave 2022 for the benefit of our mountains, glaciers, and people. I had the privilege to flag off the inaugural Snowman race on the 13th of October, which also marked the joyous occasion of the 11th Royal Wedding Anniversary. I commend the Snowman Race Secretariat and its convening partners for bringing attention to the profound existential threat that climate change poses in the context of the fragile mountain ecosystem in our region. The theme for the race, for mountains, glaciers, and people, is very appropriate, for it arouses the sense of urgency that time is running out to meaningfully address the worst impacts of climate change impacting the communities and the people living in the mountains. My congratulations and heartfelt gratitude to all the athletes of the Snowman race for taking part in this historic event. To me, as Her Majesty said, all of you are winners and true champions, not only for this event, but also for our race against climate change. Let me draw your attention to the sixth assessment report of the IPCC that states with high confidence that our glaciers are declining in Asia and will decline even more by the mid-21st century. An assessment report by the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, ICIMOD, shows that even if the world is able to hold the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, 1/3 of our glaciers will disappear. What is more alarming is that the temperature rise in mountain places like ours will be much higher, leading to devastating impacts downstream, which is already being felt. Due to these instances, we may on one hand predict measurable losses to livelihoods, the economy, and public infrastructure, as well as immeasurable losses to culture, human lives, and biodiversity on the other. These topics will also drive the discussion in the upcoming COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. To combat climate change, Bhutan has always committed to an ambitious response. Bhutan first pledged to remain carbon neutral in 2019 at 2009 at COP15 of the UNFCCC, and reaffirmed this commitment in 2015 under its first nationally determined contribution to the Paris Agreement. Our second NDC to the Paris Agreement clearly shouts out that our efforts in remaining carbon neutral by maintaining and enhancing our forest carbon sink while pursuing a low carbon and climate resilient development pathway. Like other smaller LDCs and LLDCs, Bhutan contributes the least to climate change. However, we are most vulnerable to the effects of climate change and face the consequences annually with increasing frequency and ferocity. It is an immense challenge to mitigate and adapt to the impacts of climate with the limited resources that is currently available. Today, I take this opportunity to honor the agencies and the courage of those at the front lines being impacted by climate change directly. I particularly speak of our highlanders who for centuries have been the vanguards of the environment and now must negotiate with their livelihoods being threatened and the rapid changing of the environment. In fact, I was privileged to spread the message on climate change and its impact on their livelihoods from an 8-year-old student named Chimi Yangzom from Lunana Primary School at the United Nations General Assembly. I also call upon our citizens, especially the youth, to lead climate action. We must recognize that we in Bhutan have inherited an incredible legacy of conservation and environment stewardship due to the far-sighted leadership in the past. It is our duty to preserve, promote, and pass it on for future generations. Finally, the next few days are an exciting time for the government, the scientific community, advocates, and participants in sharing ideas, stock-taking, and collaborating. I hope that the discussions will be inspiring and fruitful. Thank you, and Tashtilela.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for gracing the event and for your keynote address. For our next speaker, may I invite Azusa Kubota, resident representative of UNDP Bhutan. Azusa, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Her Majesty, the Queen of Bhutan, Honorable Lempo, Dr. Tandi Doji, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Kezan Wandi, the Chairperson of Snowman Race Secretariat, fellow speakers, distinguished panelists, athletes, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for allowing me to be part of the much-awaited Bhutan Climate Action Conclave 2022. I visited Lunana last month. What a spectacular and pristine highland community. Yet, amid this incomparable beauty lurks danger. Home to 3 of Bhutan's 17 potentially dangerous glacier lakes, Lunana lives in constant fear of glacier lake outburst floods as glaciers melt rapidly due to climate change. In case of a lake burst, the people in Tanza, the village closest to the lakes, have only 20 minutes to move to safer ground. Lunana mirrors the plight of vulnerable mountain communities reeling from climate change for no fault of their own. This is a story that must be told. And what a better way to do so than through the Snowman Race, the ultimate race for climate action. I sincerely commend Bhutan for successfully organizing the world's toughest race and taking its climate leadership to the next level. To the athletes of the race, you are the true climate heroes. And you raced across forests, rivers, gorges, mountains, and glaciers. And you became witnesses to the warming Himalayas. Your voices, stories, and insights would help draw attention to the climate vulnerabilities of the fragile mountain ecosystem So while the actual race has ended, please continue to run alongside Bhutan to spread what you have witnessed. Bhutan has always demonstrated incredible environmental stewardship and climate leadership, and therefore remains as the most credible voice on climate. A nation so small, but with a strong voice. And that voice is becoming more influential as the young Bhutanese speak up for climate. Chimi, an 8-year-old student from Lunana, wrote a very simple yet powerful letter to the world leaders, pleading them to act on climate now. And I would like to thank Honorable Limbo, Dr. Tandi Doji, for conveying her message to the world leaders at the recent UN General Assembly. Last week, I had the opportunity to hand over a bottle of melted glacier water, a powerful symbol of the Himalaya meltdown caused by warming temperatures, to Ambassador Domatrin, Bhutan's permanent representative to the UN in New York. The water was sourced from Totomi Lake in Lunana by Jamian Jamcho, a very popular Bhutanese filmmaker and climate advocate with whom UNDP Bhutan partnered on climate advocacy themed The Messenger, Ride for Action. Totomi Glacier is retreating at an alarming rate of 30 to 35 meters annually. It is a matter of time before we lose sight of this glacier. For UNDP, climate action remains at the heart of a partnership with Bhutan. Despite the hardship of the COVID-19 pandemic, Bhutan decisively moved forward with a low carbon emission agenda by elevating the ambition of the Paris Agreement through the second generation of the nationally determined contributions and introducing the country's first grid-tied solar farm. We are so humbled to be a partner of these initiatives, as well as the Snowman Race and Bhutan Climate Action Conclave. Both of these events are very timely, happening just weeks before the COP27. The COP27 will happen against a grim backdrop of the world characterized by extreme weather events. A new report by the UN released last week warns that scorching heat waves fueled by climate change could leave some areas of the world virtually inhabitable over the coming decades. It calls for aggressive steps to slow and stop climate change. And UNDP's recent Human Development Report says we live in a world of worry, a whirlpool of crises, including climate shocks, is unsettling lives and threatening humanity's very survival. What happens at the COP will determine the fate of the planet and people. It is time to usher in a new era, to rekindle hope and rewrite the future, to decide that this is not the end of humanity, but the start of a new beginning. To the Snowman Race and its athletes, you have given us hope in those uncertain and unsettled times. Thank you very much, and tashi dere.
Thank you, Amazusa, for your keynote address. I would now like to invite our next keynote speaker, Mr. Tishan Dorji, Senior Director for Asian Wildlife in WWF, who is joining us live halfway across the globe from Washington, D.C.
Your Majesty, the most gracious Gyaltsen, Queen of Bhutan, Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Chair of the National Environment Commission, Madam Azusa Kubota, Resident Representative of the UNDP, and all the distinguished participants. I'm joining in from the comforts of my home in the US, in complete awe of the incredible snowman runners, our messengers of climate action, who sprinted across the mighty Himalayas, completing one of the most difficult treks in just 5 days, symbolically highlighting the urgency of global climate action. I know firsthand how challenging and unforgiving the terrain is, from having had the great honor to trek most of the same route twice with His Majesty the King. The most memorable and inspiring moments of my life, but at the same time, the most brutal moments my body ever had to endure. Being at dizzying elevations in those mountains is truly a special and transcendental experience, reminding us daily of the sheer force of nature and at the same time, the fragility of our planet and ourselves. It's a front row seat for watching the impact of global climate change unfold right before our eyes and seeing the frightening visions of a bare Himalayan range causing famine and destruction to 1 billion people downstream if the planet keeps warming at this rate. Our sacred mountains are truly the connections to the listening heavens and the embodiment of the messenger of nature, warning us of the impending dangers and impacts of altering the global climate systems. Climate change is real, and its impacts are already pushing the limits of our planetary boundaries, irreversibly altering the Earth's regenerative and natural systems, thereby threatening the very survival of all life forms on this planet, including us humans. It's a race that's increasingly becoming difficult to win because the world is not serious enough to commit to reducing consumption, fundamentally changing the way we value nature and ecosystems, and coming together as one world community to solve one of the biggest challenges humanity has ever faced. We all witnessed the best of global solidarity in Paris in 2015, when 196 countries signed on to a legally binding agreement to combat climate change and adapt to its effects. But few years later, unfortunately, we are now witnessing the worst of global solidarity, an extremely polarized world, restarting coal industries, drilling for more oil, endless wars, and diverting important and massive resources away from climate, poverty reduction, and sustainability programs. Countries who are the most responsible for climate change are doing so little, both at home and abroad, to address climate impacts and environmental degradation. Today, we are facing the double emergencies of human-induced climate change and biodiversity loss, threatening the well-being of current and future generations. Climate and biodiversity crises are not separate from each other, but are very much interconnected. To limit global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade, we need to restore and regenerate nature. And to stop nature loss, we really need to work towards halving emissions by 2030 and limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade by all means. Just launched last week, our flagship WWF Living Planet Report 22 reveals an average of 69% drop in monitored wildlife populations since 1970. Most alarming is that freshwater populations have now dropped by an average of 83%. Common sense is not common anymore. Every year, the findings and facts are taking us away from our aspirations to reach carbon neutrality and instead bringing us close to the risk of sixth mass extinction and collapse of natural systems that sustains the very life on this planet. The highlands through which the snowman race took place exemplifies this fragile balance between nature, people, and climate. Highland mountain communities are most vulnerable and affected by climate change, and their lives and livelihoods will be destroyed if the world cannot come together for climate justice and climate action, and agree on a bold and ambitious plan to achieve the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. Bhutan, as a carbon negative country, is doing more than its share to address climate change and protect the environment at a national level. In 2020, Bhutan was one of the 94 countries to endorse the Leaders' Pledge for Nature to reverse biodiversity loss by 2030, thereby exhibiting great leadership for nature and environmental protection, as it had done for climate action with its commitment to remain carbon neutral for all times to come. We in the environmental community are hopeful that both Climate COP27 and Biodiversity COP15 will place nature at the heart of global solutions and commit to a fair share of financial and technical commitment to countries like Bhutan, who are increasingly mainstreaming climate solutions and exhibiting great leadership and commitment in tackling climate change and biodiversity loss. In closing, as a board member of the Snowman Race Committee, I would like to humbly convey my immense gratitude to our beloved His Majesty the King for inspiring and conceiving this great idea of the Snowman Race to awaken our conscience and highlight the urgency of climate action around the world. This journey has been in the making for the last few years, and many have been engaged at various levels throughout the process. My heartfelt commendations and admiration, firstly, to all the incredible runners, and to all involved in organizing one of the most challenging races in the world. This is a race we all must win. Thank you, Antash Dele.
Thank you, sir, for your keynote address. Now, I would like to invite our final keynote speaker, Mr. Michael Phillip, who is also joining us live from US. Mr. Philip is the member of National Council of WWF and is also the board member of Bhutan Foundation.
Thank you. Your Majesty, Excellencies, race participants, and distinguished guests. I am honored to speak at the first Climate Action Conclave, honoring the purpose and the participants in the Bhutan Snowman Race. In addition to being a board member for Bhutan Foundation and National Council at WWF, I'm the chair of Bhutan for Life, which is an innovative financing structure for conservation at scale, created in partnership with the Royal Government of Bhutan, WWF, the Green Climate Fund, Global Environmental Facility, and private donors. Bhutan for Life is designed to support sustainable economic development in line with the principles of gross national happiness in Bhutan. We all know challenges with climate change and sustainable development continue, including accelerating loss of biodiversity. We need to continually look for new and innovative ways to finance projects to address these issues. Over the last several years, my colleagues in Bhutan, as well as in the US, Europe, and around the world, have been studying ways to use ecological assets, soil carbon, forest carbon, clean water, clean air, and biodiversity, the positive ecological assets created by good forest farming, fisheries practices, and other environmental concerns. To fund, we believe we can use these ecological assets, essentially the ecological asset balance sheet of countries like Bhutan, to fund sustainable development and conservation at scale. This is a global effort and global dialogue going on at the highest levels of government and finance. The White House just put out a paper on natural asset accounting and talked about a natural asset balance sheet in the United States. The New York Stock Exchange is working on an innovative structure called natural asset companies, which would be able to create publicly listed companies based off these ecological assets. And we ourselves are working on something called an ecological asset trust that would use assets in an innovative structure to help fund food transformation in New England and the Northeast of the US. I will be traveling to Bhutan next week for a Bhutan for Life meeting, and will be there for 2 weeks, and look forward to discussing these and other structures with the government and other key stakeholders in Bhutan on how we can move the climate change and sustainable development agenda forward. Again, I would like to join the other participants in congratulating the participants in the Snowman Race. While never having done the Snowman Trek myself, I have been to Bhutan many times and understand the difficulties that race involves and the challenges it has. And it's an amazing statement that you've taken the time and made the effort to do this, to raise awareness of climate change and all the issues around it, and to highlight all the good initiatives that the Bhutan and the government and the people of Bhutan have made to combat these issues. So I congratulate you once again. Tashi Dela.
Thank you, Mr. Philip, for making time for the event despite the time difference, and thank you for your keynote address. We are now moving into the first segment of the conclave themed Stories from the Highlands. We will hear the first-hand account of climate change impacts in Bhutan and its mountains, glaciers, and people. This session aspires to tell the story of climate change through photographs, videos, and experience of the race. First off, we would like to take you all to Lunana, a remote highland community in Bhutan where climate change is a daily reality.
Ke chapta de ke chani min ke chabi sagona ke mi chabas jumla hema ke chami de so ta ke ma chimi chabi hema satin to de te puro chol jumela rum sale rumbe chomi sale chochi te ani be beume te so ta kachiki kule ina se te namisimi ta chagel na bigi jiti joran jone se shumla
Ata bewajin ngachigi inda le chapter ju bewajin ta ngachira inda di khodi inda chubagi na le khau jamni guzung sela ta tare na ba bewajin inda sumba jibana ma khau jamni guzum me sela ta ngachi teletin gi be ta inda sumba da jibana chami digi ta sadrida tun be gale ya kabe mi chaba shinda titele nim shauchi da shudi gi be ta ngachira gi te chodi se te titele ra ngachira sai gi netang regime manju mi Chiti invest shunila. Nyetang ngomba dera namshi juwale tundi gibe tebe invest shunila. Te tele tundi gibe dalapa maungpa nalu te ngachigi lo chutagi jable te yatsa gyumbodi te nyamdi gi mi yoga se gi chajadi te ngachira luna gyu gi mi yachala chuta chagi tebe landi yu se shunila.
Guna shani be guna chachi churiana pi telenam tola long ya ane be pa kilo ane pa poto chetti jinjipchi ngachi mi pura chimko ja ya galinguli the pura na ya ga to khanja be te shari gai pana ane chetti di chawi 자기 땅 멋진 가티에 땅 거면 가라지 갑자기 난게 미베니기 루주 아치를 고다 남스는 도움했어 좀 등어치 토이 보러 가되미디 감만 보고 다도 주인겐 가라 따마 유치가 강한 뱅겐 가라 카우디 뉴소이 내가 남스니
In 2002, when I visited the same area, we could just cross over to the glacier ice on Thotome main glacier and then walk down. But now, at present, as you see, we cannot go over. Everything has been melted and all these ice chunks, icebergs are floating. These are not intact ice, but all iceberg. So it's very risky to go on. This is occurring mainly because of melting, excessive melting. So that is the state where Thotome is now currently an active stage in the formation of a huge moraine dam lake. There are solutions for climate change. The only thing that they need to keep in mind is they need to be aware of the impacts of climate change and then adapt themselves at a grassroots level. It's always better to start from the community bottom up so that they will have the full ownership of whatever they do in terms of adaptation.
And now we have a special message from Dashu Palju Dorji, Special Advisor to the National Environment Commission. Dashu is a lifelong conservationist who has spearheaded the establishment of many environmental institutions in the country, namely the Royal Society for Protection of Nature, Bhutan's first not-for-profit environmental organization in 1987. Dashu is also the founding president of the Bhutan Ecological Society.
Say a few words about the snowman race which is being run to highlight climate change here in Bhutan. In the old days, where they are running today from now would be inaccessible to human movement and even wildlife movement because all the passes would be snowbound and you couldn't pass these snows. But today, because of climate change, all these passes are now, you can cross them at any time of the year. They're no longer snowbound. And there are many other events on climate change which are taking place, alarming changes which would bring great disasters, natural disasters to Bhutan. One is glacial lakes. All our glaciers are melting and retreating at an alarming rate. If any GLOF event takes place, could be triggered by an earthquake or anything, and this could cause great danger downstream, especially to Punakha. My experience with climate change goes back to the mid-60s or the late 60s in 1968 when we had a terrible flood in October. And then the next event coming to light would be the heavy snowfall that we had, unusual weather in April 26, 1971, where many yaks were killed and a number of yak herders were also killed. And this culminated in the people of the upper regions going and pleading to His Majesty, the late Third King, that ever since the government permitted mountaineers to come to the higher altitudes to scale the peaks, unusual weather patterns had been taking place, and the people felt that they were being disturbing or angering the guardian deities of these mountains. So this issue was taken up before Parliament in the autumn session in 1971, and it was then that all the religious peaks which were named by the public were then banned for mountaineering, and only a few peaks were permitted to be climbed. So the next event where there were a number of unusual weather pattern changes. In Thimphu, you can see new species of birds coming up, and even as recently, king cobras spotted in Dojizong, which is at about 2,200 meters. That is way out of their range. These are warm climate creatures. And just recently, just the other day, somebody reported a cobra just near the Sixth Senses Hotel, which is at nearly 2,400 meters. So there are unusual things happening. And also Bhutan is very dependent on our hydropower for income generation to enjoy the lifestyles that we enjoy today. The government's progress, all the development programs, and they're all dependent on our glaciers. But it is reported to me by friends going up on treks that at least in the Paru region, 3 glaciers, there's nothing left of them. Just the glacial moraine barriers that once said that there was water there. So, dear friends, we all also need help to adapt to all these climate change issues. And Bhutan is facing these, and we have done nothing to aggravate nature. We are simply victims of or hostages to activities by other human beings in other parts of the world, which is making climate change go up at an alarming rate. So, to all the participants of the Snowman Race, thank you for coming to Bhutan and highlighting our issues and our problems. Enjoy your race. I hope you all had a good time. Enjoy Bhutan. And this is the land of happiness. Let us keep our happiness.
I would like to submit our sincere gratitude to Dr. Paljuje Dorji for making time to share this very special message for the conclave. Up next, we have Mr. Damche Rinzin, Chief Tourism Officer from the Tourism Council of Bhutan, who has been working closely with the Snowman Race Secretariat since 2019 to coordinate the Snowman Race. Mr. Damche is here to take us through the Snowman Race Trail with images and photographs to tell the story of nature, people, and climate change in the highlands. The floor is yours, Mr. Damche.
A very good evening, lah. I must admit that I'm not a climate expert. I'm here to share my two brief stories on the title, Witnessing Climate Change, Storytelling Through Photographs. My story is based on my own experience having trekked the snowman race course myself in 2019. My first story is about sleeping in a tent in a valley next to a mountain with a regular sound of falling glacier. I will never forget this moment and this experience. And every time I think of this experience, it haunts me. I get this fear. I could not sleep with the regular sound of falling glacier. Worse, our highland horsemen tell us that we will be the first ones to be washed away if there is a lake outburst with the glacier falling in the lake. This is when I thought I would die for the first time. This is when I started to think of my family. This is when I had a feeling of regret for being a workaholic and not taking time to do other things, things that I wanted to do in life. It was such a hopeless feeling. It was a feeling of the end of my life. It was intense. And I still get goosebumps talking about this today because I feel the fear. We get agitated to even hear honking sound of a car while sleeping, and that happens only once in a while. But imagine having to sleep with the regular sound of glacier falling. That is living with a constant fear. And imagine if you have to go through such constant fear in your life. The fear of uncertainty, the fear of you dying, the fear of you losing your loved ones, the fear of losing your home, the fear of losing your community. Climate change is real. I don't need a scientific explanation because I've seen it and I've experienced it myself. I can never forget this dreadful experience. I feel sorry for people living in the highlands. They have to live in this constant fear due to the habits and doings of other people. My next story is about my next brief story is called The Unwelcome Beach. This sandy beach is located between Sojo and Tenchi village in Lunana. Probably it is the highest beach in the world. When I first saw this beach, I was very excited because this is very beautiful. But later I realized that this beautiful sandy beach is a scar for the community. This beautiful sandy beach replaced a vast area to grow what is grown there. It replaced grazing land for the highlanders. It took away their recreational ground. They lost the opportunity to have a beautiful camping ground and make money out of tourism. A lot of things was possible if it was not a sandy beach. A lot of things was possible if it was not flooded due to climate change. This sand is no use to them. They never welcomed the beach. And possibly they lost the only biggest plain area. Climate change caused this, and they bear such unacceptable consequences, but they have no choice. And this beautiful village is called Tenche, and it is located just above the sandy beach, little high in terms of elevation. And these are school children who go to school where the yak in the classroom was filmed, and we don't want their village to turn into another sandy beach. I'm honored to be involved in the snowman race, and I'm proud of what snowman race is doing in terms of creating climate action and climate awareness. Trekking along the snowman race course was one of the most life-changing experiences and spiritual experience for me. The journey was transformational. It allowed me to look inside, to appreciate what is around me, and also made me feel guilty of my actions that has implications to people in the highlands who have nothing to do with the struggles caused by climate change. It really opened my eyes, and I'm honored to be part of the snowman race. I believe in the vision of snowman race. I believe in the goals of snowman race. I believe together, small or big, we can bring climate action. There is nothing negligible. And doing nothing is not a choice. Climate change is real. Climate change is global. Climate change spares no one. So climate change is urgent. Thank you for the opportunity. Tashtali.
Thank you, Mr. Damshu, for the visual treat and the powerful images, giving us a glimpse of life in the mountains and the close connection between nature, people, and climate. Moving ahead, let us hear the story and insights of our incredible snowman race athletes through a panel discussion. The session will be moderated by Mr. Tile Namge, who has years of experience working in the field of environment, climate change, and sustainable development in both policies and field implementation. Together with Mr. Tile Namge, I would like to invite all the panelists to take your seat at the stage, please. Ms. Karma Youngden, Mr. Luke Nelson, Mr. Nate Bender, Mr. Sangyong Chu, and Mr. Simon Mutai.
Good evening, Your Excellency, distinguished guests, the runners and all viewers around the world and in the country. So now we are moving in the session where we are hearing from the runners who have also witnessed what we have been hearing in the video and from the other speakers. So they have just had a fresh experience on what is happening in our high mountains. So we'll move quickly into this. So first, we want to know the motivation of why our runners took part in such a grueling race. It's supposed to be one of the toughest treks, but they ran it. So to start with, I'll start from our national runners. Let's live it. Snowman race in the Kachibe, Jamatobin says Hachi na se Shunamela.
Nasula. Snowman race nalu Jama Togomidi Sora de Majidi Naridi Nema Kanemishi Shunila. In the Besichure, the snowman race semidi Godin Tabnami Nam the Lut and Achar Hachichama Matochin, the Gang Ya Ladadi Kadebe Jurwa Juina. The Alapa Lagonsumnova Dimimis to Kadebe Judoga, Yagi Sopanetanso Jamigonimela. Dani Bening Ani she Subni the Le. The Bechamato is Shunila.
Yes, Karachela. The coming on then let's have any sugar. The Mapajunide ya la jume, the Naponto Kachive joins a such a session.
So many lessons, Jamato Venus Sinila. Thing I had about Tomato said or Maki, the Langokamnam de Nasakanchessunina. Thingana, I'm somebody to say or Maki. Alafakadivina give his Sungasino.
So I just asked them why they ran this race as well. So now I would like to invite international participants on why you chose to come to Bhutan and go to such a difficult place to take part in this race. So we can start with, I think, from Nate.
Thank you. I chose to participate in the snowman race because this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to mix mountain running with climate advocacy, and I believe that effective climate action starts with joy, and mountain running brings me a lot of joy, and the best way to get people involved long-term in climate action is to start with what brings them joy. And so for me, this was a chance to use whatever voice I have as a mountain athlete, and to use these experiences in the mountains to elevate my voice as an advocate for climate action.
Okay, thank you. So then next I would like to ask the same question to Simon. Would you like to share your motivations for joining the snowman race?
When I was invited to come here, I definitely was fairly open-minded myself to be ambassador for the mountain that we live, we get the joy from. And arriving here and seeing how well the mountain provide the joy that we all receive as an athletes, traveling here and running through the mountain and the very fragile ecosystems, I had a great sense of appreciation of what this nature is to us and to all of us who enjoy it, and to endure what we snowman races provided to me personally.
Thank you, Simon. And now, Luke, your motivation.
Of course. When I first heard of the snowman race, there were immediately two reasons that came to mind to me that essentially made it mandatory that I participate. The first was the route itself, being touted as one of the world's toughest races. I've spent the last 15 years of my life traveling the world, competing in the world's toughest races, and I wanted to see if this would hold up. It sure did. The second reason was the fascination of an event being held as a tool for climate activism. I've personally seen the impacts of climate change at my home with forest fires, in the Arctic Circle with melting permafrost, and the opportunity to come and see those changes and then be an ambassador for the rest of the world for what I've seen was an opportunity that I couldn't pass up. And so I pleaded quite dearly with the organizers to allow me to have a spot.
Thank you, Luke. I think we're hearing about the same impacts all the way in the US as well as here. So let me continue with you and ask you now, I'm not sure when you're running up at such high elevations, if you were just looking at where your foot is going, or if you had a chance to look around and observe what's actually happening. So maybe, I'm sure you had a vision and image of what Bhutan was and what's happening in terms of climate change. So now, having been up in the mountains for this short period, but I'm sure you got to appreciate what's happening up there as well. So could you share your impressions in terms of what you saw, and then what you're coming away with in terms of your observations?
Absolutely. I think first and foremost, yes, I did occasionally raise my eyes from the difficult footing and was able to see around and clearly saw footprints of glaciers that had receded with large moraine not filled with ice. We saw the destruction of Gaza hot springs. We saw firsthand these changes. Prior to the race, we were given some advice from an abbot, and he said that we should travel through these mountains with open hearts. And what I saw most impactfully were the people and the threat that they live with every day. You could feel that, and it's so important for us to be able to share this is real and it is affecting them now, and we need to carry that with us as we move forward.
Thank you. Thank you. I guess it's good to hear that you did manage to actually lift your eyes up and see what's around you as well. Then now, can I ask Simon also the same question? Simon is coming from Tanzania and from Kilimanjaro, so you also have an appreciation of receding glaciers. So your impressions about Bhutan?
In comparison, when I see the glaciers on Kilimanjaro, what is happening to them, and coming here to travel through your mountain, and glass my eyes up and looking what is happening, how much of that glacier is melting. I can see the evidence of the morams on the various different parts of the snow race coast. It's quite disturbing to see this. We deny the realities of what this community living on the highlands, how affected that life of theirs is going to be destructed, and including myself living on the Kilimanjaro, this life of ours is going to be a difference. An example, we're seeing lots of floods on various different parts of the mountain, and I experienced the second hands on your mountain. I can see certainly the amount of water coming through this mountain, and that are causing many issues whom us living on the foothills. So certainly it's a race that we all have to win, and the climate change is real, and we really have to take it serious of the matters.
Thank you. So we'll move over to Luke as well. Would you like to, Nate, sorry. We just finished Luke. So Nate, would you like to share your observations and impressions?
Sure. I echo a lot of the first-hand experiences that Luke mentioned, and also one thing that sticks out most viscerally to me is how wrong it felt to be hiking at nearly 18,000 feet in shorts and a t-shirt. And we're up on these passes that are nearly snow-free, and it's warm enough to be in shorts and a t-shirt, and that feels wrong no matter what time of year it is at that elevation. That is something that will stick with me for the rest of my life.
Thank you. So we've heard from our international participants, our athletes, who did get a chance to see what was happening, and we're hearing about common, I think, observations as well. Now, I'd like to move over to our national runners and find out their experiences as well. So, Sangilo Tach Shugobela, the Namshi Jurose de Kai Goymoshla, the Tele na Chorogi Tadibe Bero, my Libidina Taganale Sundamoshla, my Yukalo Charama, Kadeve Namshi Jugi, Kadeve Judega Sachi, Shishi Tonto Kadeve Anigi Sachi, say Shunome.
Alas Karishela. Namshi Jua se Judalu Imagine Chigi Niamadika debe Yuga Nachi Sale Mishibe Shinila. Dato Nachari Pam de Sule Ninbetauda. Da Dale Datogi Sornang Luta Beodalu, the Juradi Bombera Judesi Shinila. The Kadebe Sochin Tangachari Ladi, Shunyokin Bemale, the Nachari Sonam Latin, the Bedumisugi, Kulangaji Mishibella. The Rangi Pam de Sule Ninbetaudalu, Kongi Lujidu. Ngachilu shekdigi labdalu ngachi ani nimdalu tak asi jurwa bombera somme sishunila kadebe dupse wachin ta ngachigi yakhan ani jagunbe si wachinla ta nam jagi chanla chabigi disugu ta pebochi daganila daganale bebedulu daganalo chanla chamnigi disugu chugobigi disugu wachin te chudi mablera chapchamni me be tesnula te Nam Sekalu Bewajin, the Lotto Dunigi Disu Hevale, the Lotto Duremlu Chapchap, Dan Zumbe, Namshi Jurua, Namsin Bombay Asnose, then the Tongarigi ship Chigulu de Anzumbe, Jurua Bombay Asnula. Then Tanga the Totongachi Islaman race, Tinachama to Bedlu. Tangagi Nikon Chugunalu, like Islaman race calibration run Sachi Bedlu. The gang Tosadadi Ko Tomela. The Jibeongale, the Masuchina Ko Mendusishimila. Gangi, the Marataholuba, Ko Judigibe, the Gadis check the Gibe, Gara and Vecharebe, the Vejome Sishinila, no form bomb Jomela. The Len Digi Mase, the Latosolabas, that Peboch, Lazum Jomabawachin, the Maya Asichi Islaman Reski, the acclimatization Yajabojuila, Ani Bebodulu, the Yale Namsumi Jurodula. Nemayalu Zendumlo and Sumina. That Dichibeola Yalo Zendum de Zendunge Somenacho. Danibota that Lochile Lochu Humanity, Sepja Tamato, Yalafa Zuni, and Capombe du Sunila. Danibota Tangachere, do Gahapchigi Namshijua Bamsu Sishinimila. The so Musudera Macharagi, Samlingibe, Tato Macharagi, Snowman racing at a banju chapti. Me, Zamling Nasuna, do the Gibe Judola. Animchi, Miss Nasugi. Zamlingalu pe sobachin tanya khatule samba rewasere digi dubmese machal zamlingi hago sobachin zamlingi lapchi be labedu sumbe no som chibitani michigi nodo sumbe no som tandi bewachin nachigi namshi jurwadi ba sursu se nomela dime machini lochi namsemi chorabe junigi nenga bombedu se junibila
so karichela lebe Laile Kamayandele Sachi Sunas Shunive, Lagalava Kadeve, Juaju de Gesla Tachi, video네 sunde na chorgera sachi se na shuna mala.
Namshi jodi bombane asun shunila. Hema shi chikal nasim khochamni tadi khowa mapal mi chabe sunila. Hema be tadi namsimi machi nam ginnadi hema dia dire mesula. Khara punna khata dave punna khadimula. Te tarakap jidi khara ya ikhadi nam ginna labe sube sunila. Namshi jodi bombane asun. Hema be ngachi ngachi ya buktu sa rishi asun nimi nani di ngachi ya rishi mi hanam seila. Chu misale riten demi la shachira sei. Tenga somen resna chamato we ya ika bisesulu khawda richi pisu seno be chamato isishunila.
Las Kadichela. For the benefit of our international racers and the audience, I'll briefly summarize what Mr. Sangye and Karma has shared. So Mr. Sangye is from Tagana, and he says that his lifetime has not been that long, but what he hears from his elders is saying there is a noticeable change, and especially because they come from a farming community. In the cropping seasons has been changing, and the seasons and in the farming, the seasons and the timing for cropping is very important, but it's now no longer sinking. In the past, when it's time to start your field work, the rains would be on time. They know the timing is there. But now when it's time to start the work, or they've started the work, the rains don't come. They're late. So it's a negative impact. And then by the time it's the harvest season, that's when the rains should actually be stopping. But instead of, and there's more and more incidences of when they're actually harvesting, the rains come and then it's destroyed the crops. So there's been a detrimental effect on their harvest. So that's what he's been observing as well. And then he's also sharing that the difficulty and the burden should not be only here, and then there would be a solution, but we need more help and cooperation from outside as well. And from Laya, Karma has said that she has also observed the changes, and she remembers that in the past it used to, now as I think we heard in one of the messages, it should be snowing up there now and getting colder. So usually the communities would move further down south to Punakha, to lower elevations. But now most of the people are still able to stay up there because it's not that cold. And then they've also seen more incidences of the landslides and flooding, and also even fire, and then the drying of water sources that they're observing directly in their communities. So that's in terms of what's happening in the observations. So I think before we move on a little more, we have a little bit of time. Maybe I can go back to the other table and ask, when you were running up there, were there any particular things that stood out, or did you have any sort of in terms of inspiration, in terms of would you come back, and in terms of did you see stark changes? So would you like to just share with the audience? We're going to start with Nate.
Sure. Two things come to mind immediately. One is just, this is my first time in the Himalaya, and seeing the grandeur and the immensity of these mountains. It's a place I've dreamed of traveling to, and it feels surreal to have experienced that, and I feel incredibly grateful and lucky from just from valuing a place ecologically from that standpoint. I just I'm still processing that. The second piece is the kindness of everyone that we met along the way. People in different villages meeting us with milk tea and biscuits and smiles, and no matter how smelly we were. And I'm also immensely grateful for that.
Thank you. Simon?
It's very difficult to contemplate about the whole experience that we went through the last 5 days running through your great mountain, and being feel like we were protected, and we were offer tea by the local highland, and it's very hard to say how when will I turn around to come back again and to share this great experience with you. I mean, certainly the intention of the snowman race, it's great intent and very deep to myself that I'm here and to share, to hold hands with you and to see how far we can go with this to the rest of the world.
Thank you. Luke?
I think I would maybe sound a bit like an echo here with how difficult it is to find words to express our experience. There's something unique that happens in ultra events. Your ego is stripped away, and you start wearing your emotions on the outside. Many times, I would be in awe and tears as I looked around at the mountains and the scenery, and even more so by the kindness of the Highland people that we came across. The cheers from the school children in Lunana, the handmade signs emphasizing the importance of climate action. It leaves you different and with a greater sense of purpose.
Thank you. I guess the race has had bigger impact more than in terms of just the messages, but also your impressions and the connection with the communities. And I guess this is the important connection we want to make over here. So it's very good to hear from your experiences about this. So now, to wind up, we know COP27 is coming up. So we wanted to see if we can convey a message from the participants of the runners. I'll just translate for national participants as well. After Dentasum de Chinalu, Zamlingi, Chisogibe, Namshi Jurogi, Shenzumchi, Tanyawala. The thing Kechi Dun, Beta Shenzumanich Jumala. The Dinalu na Namshi Jurogibe, Neboiru, Pemboiru, na Katule, Sageva, Rewakadeva, Sendem Kadeva se Shunichi watching Nani Sachi, Shuna se, Suna se Shunivila.
Nasukadinchela. Da Dintra Sumgi Chapkale, Tangachara Zamling Gikechok. The Soda Sonamgi JB, Zamling Kechusuna, Junionimela, the Anibada, the Namsemika Dinche, Junila, same Gailan Zumbe, the Male Kechusunalu, Deve, Jendose Gondalula. Da Nikatule Nalu Juajinla Taru Kechu disu debe Nalu Junbadalu, Tenga Chergi Yakabki 2 dream Dendigibe Chalanani Mitse Limbera Nangopti Geche Shunila. So are the Zamling Nalu, Nacheragi to Yakab Chigibe, Genkupadi, Nachergi Namshi Jua, the Salebe Misunim, Bemisula, the Terbari Jukula. The Salebe Misube Yakabachungui, Yarge Maju Yakabchina. The Anibindi, the Anigi Dintasumgi Japolu, Zamlingi, Tanamshi Juruagi, Jesum Sobalubewachin, Tani Hatule, Rewada, Mendep said the Besichu, Tangachirigi Utipsugi, Kate Dada, Shenzum di Lishumbe Sogobe Seshunila. The Gadebesochin, the Nacharigi Hapti Yagi Maju Bindigi, Nachile Namsimi. Namshi Juruagi Nalu, never Japsubi and factory the city Mila. The Anibodalu, Gehab Shenkalabadi Leshula, the Aniboda Andsuge Kara Sung de Chikabe Nashinave, the Konkechusulu Lishumbe, Nachigi Shumidi, Tangagi Shumiding I Ganemela, the Nachara Kechusugira Shuachin, Namisemi, the Tangasada Hinsabe, Jones Shunila, Somesora and Gelchinalu, the Kechusuna Jumdalu. Sansabe go the Tugo de Kashela. Aniboda Nikatula Medam Sirra, Nachara Gehapi, Dugehapi, Tuma Shobe, Daya Nariribe Shu, Nariribe Zazabetulam di Zoshinabe, Namshi Ruadi, Baon Subachin, the Gehamale Pentomase, Chiringachara Zamling Yonlura, the Pentomni Me Semedi, ngarigi sornangje debe juin si shunila naskarchila.
Karchela. Am karmalu kopchna wale sunigela. Rewada sindap kanimagala. Passionige sunigela.
Namchi jiwadi bomra hasan shunila te nga chigal hema bewachin te chuso khakita te chuma palemi to shunila. Tari bewadi chukiya tani minula te chu jamto to bethosu be shunila te hema beda di chu gelan desha da karake cha chuma palamoto medurwa ni khachla shuma to bene ta zo bache bene minu namchi jiwadi bomra hasan shunila te nga naso meres na jamato mediga nasm sem gai ngandari muchi go khoftas namne nasm sem gai shunila.
Thank you, Ella. So I'll just briefly summarize for you before I pass on the question for you as well. So the message here is that the changes are happening here in Bhutan. They're seeing it, and then they know that there's a lot of experts and practitioners who are working on these the issues. And when the meeting is going to take place, Mr. Sangye has said that he wishes for a very fruitful conclusion to the meetings, to the conference, and that something will come out about. And it's the practitioners and experts who will have to make sure that happens, and the leaders who are there. And then it's not just for the benefit of our country, but the whole international community as well. So he has his prayers and hopes for that. So then with that, I would like to pass on to our three international panelists. What would be the message that you would like to convey to the upcoming 27th Conference of Parties? Yes.
I think I'd like to draw a parallel between the snowman race and climate action, because conditions shape our ability to run in the mountains. You can think about things like rain and mud and wind. Those things slow us down, just the same as sunshine and nice temperatures can help us move fast in the mountains. And those conditions, the same thing applies to climate action in terms of large systemic factors, systemic conditions for climate action. The research shows again and again that worldwide, people are ready to take collective climate action, but we need the right supporting conditions to help us move as fast as possible on climate action. So my message for the decision makers at COP27 is to lead us with those right conditions, lead us with effective international agreements and policy and commitments to sustainable business practices that set the effective conditions for all of us to move effective climate action forward as fast as possible. So help us with those conditions. And thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, Nate. Simon, would you like to convey your message?
To the point of our leaders and the climate actions individuals, as ambassadors, the speed is faster than we can conquer, and we need to move faster and faster and faster. And I urge all of you who understanding what the snowman races have given to us to move parallel to our side, to allow us to protect our fragile mountain and the food production that we don't know when we're going to have our next meals. That's the question. Is it the world that we want to heritage to our children? That's the question. And I think we have to really move very fast pace to act and repair what we have damaged and bring life to those who are living on the highlanders, who are distracted with the global weather parameters. We have to take the action very fast.
Thank you. Luke?
I first must say that I'm so grateful for this opportunity and the education that we've received here in Bhutan. As far as a message to COP27, we must act now. We stand as witnesses to the changes, the threats, and the risk to lives and humanity. Irreversible damage and destruction is at our doorstep, and we need swift and significant system change on a global level now.
Thank you. I think those are some very pertinent messages we have to convey. And I would like to summarize here and just in conclusion, in terms of what I have learned. So just from hearing from the experiences of the runners, what they have seen is real. So the changes are real. It's happening from the local experience to the visitors' impressions of and your own experiences from back home and seeing what's happening over here. So there is I think a chord that's been struck, and it's the people and the lives and the communities that comes out, I think, in terms of connections. So why we're doing this, it's not just for the science, but it's to help the people. So whether it's environment or climate action, it's for our humanity and well-being of the people. And then also, in the end, I think I heard about the speed. So this, if it's a snowman track, it takes about 3 weeks, but this is done in five days. So I think that's a message. We need action and we need it fast now. It's no longer a trek. It's been 27 years, COP is 27 years of negotiation, so now we really need to speed it up. So that's the key message I think I'm hearing from here. So thank you to all our panelists. A round of applause for them, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tille, and to all our panelists for this deeply personal, profound, and insightful session. Building onto this conversation, we will deep dive into the subject of climate change and move on to the second segment, themed climate impacts and actions in the region, science, policies, and strategies, where we'll spotlight the impacts of climate change in Bhutan and, more importantly, discuss the challenges and opportunities faced by Bhutan and by the Hindu Kush Himalayan region to mitigate and adapt to the impacts of climate change. And to start this segment, we have a special message from Dashu Sringtobge, former Prime Minister of Bhutan, who is also a passionate climate advocate.
Zangpola, and a very good evening. The snowman race. What an amazing race. A race along our highest mountains, past our pristine glaciers, through wild and challenging terrain. A race with a cause, an urgent cause, to draw the attention of the whole world on our collective war against climate change. I join the entire country in congratulating all the participants of the snowman race. There's absolutely no doubt that all of you, each and every one of you, are the world's fittest endurance athletes. Now, I did the fabled snowman trek a few years ago. It's a stunningly beautiful trek along pastures and lakes, tiny communities, and yak herders. But almost all the trail is above the tree line, reaching as high as 5,500 meters. It took me a good 3 weeks to complete the trek. You did it in 5 quick days. And you have put yourself through this punishing pace to show the world what must be done now to fight climate change. I followed your progress closely in the past 5 days. But while I did not see ultramarathon runners. I did not see endurance athletes. What I saw were warriors, climate warriors, with a single-minded determination to draw the attention of the world on the urgency of climate change. Climate change is real. The science is unequivocal. Through the Paris Agreement, the world had agreed to contain global warming to a maximum of 2 degrees Celsius and preferably to 1.5 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial levels. That was 7 years ago. We have made no progress during those 7 years. In fact, the 2022 IPCC report warns that the world is set to reach the 1.5 degrees Celsius level within the next 2 decades. The report goes on to confirm what we should already know, that rising temperatures are melting glaciers, increasing sea levels, and causing widespread disasters, from heat waves and forest fires to floods and unprecedented storms, resulting in immeasurable losses and damage to both nature and people. They warn that, left unchecked, these effects of climate change will become even more pronounced, widespread, and much more severe. What should cause us even more alarm is that the IPCC report warns that resource-poor countries like ours and marginalized communities, again like ours, will bear the brunt of the impact of climate change. Bhutan is fortunate. Our enlightened kings have taught us that economic progress and the protection of our planet is not a zero-sum game. And they have shown us how to protect our natural environment and to live in harmony with nature. As a result, Bhutan today is carbon negative, with clear rivers, pristine forests, and biological hotspots. However, we in Bhutan are already dealing with the effects of climate change. The 1994 glacial lake outburst flood, GLOF, was a wake-up call on the devastations that can be wreaked by climate change. The outburst caused unprecedented damage downstream, destroying fertile lands, farmhouses, and infrastructure. With continued melting of our glaciers in our mountains, many of our glacial lakes are a looming threat to Bhutan, with the potential to unleash even more suffering to lives and livelihood. Fighting climate change calls for enlightened leadership. Leaders with wisdom to see what is not apparent. Leaders with courage to tread the untrodden. Leaders who take stewardship of humanity. Leaders like our enlightened monarchs. Deeply concerned by the looming threat and impacts of climate change, His Majesty the King, Jigme Kheser Namgyel Wangchuk, continues to provide much needed leadership in the fight against climate change. The snowman race is born out of this concern for climate change. His Majesty the King is the inspiration, the architect, and the driving force of the snowman race, a race that calls on the world to join the fight against climate change. This year, during the maiden snowman race, 29 brave men and women have stepped up as warriors of climate change. Their sprint through the highest trails in the world should beckon climate change actions across the world. As these brave men and women dedicate their race to climate change, I call on governments, NGOs, private sector, and the people of the world to join the fight against climate change. The window of opportunity is closing, but together, all of us can stop and indeed reverse the threat to our planet, and thereby ensure a sustainable future for ourselves, our children, and their children. Tashidile. Thank you.
May I take the opportunity to thank Dr. Sring Topke for delivering the special message to the conclave. We are now moving into the deep dive session on climate science, policies, and strategies with a panel of distinguished speakers who are all experts on climate change, biodiversity, and environment. May I once again invite Mr. Chile Namge and the panelists. Ms. Dr. Singye Doji, Specialist, Weather and Climate Services in National Center for Hydrology and Meteorology. Mr. Sonam Dage, Senior Environment Officer, National Environment Commission Secretariat. Dr. Pema Wangda, Executive Director, Bhutan for Life Program. We also have two panelists joining us online. Mr. Bhupesh Adhikari, Senior Air Quality Specialist from Isibod, joining from Nepal. Ms. Sri Lata Kamila, Head of Climate Change Adaptation in UNDP, joining from Thailand. Over to you, Mr. Chile.
Thank you, La Kezang. Now we're moving into a little more deep dive, as Kezang has said. So we will hear from a wide range of experts from the international organizations to our national experts. Here we will try and get a picture of what's happening in the region and in the country, and also try and highlight some of the bold actions that's been taken by the country. Do we need to do more? And what are some of the key messages, again, we can get in terms of the scientific messaging and the action that needs to take place. So we will begin first by hearing from Isimod, who the organization works on the whole Hindu Kush Himalayan region. So they do a lot of scientific work. So let me invite Bhupesh. I hope you're online. If you can let us know in terms of what is happening in the Hindu Kush region and what is in store for us for the coming years in terms of climate change impacts.
Thank you, Tinle. Your Majesty, Linpo Dorji. First of all, it's an honor for me to be in this August gathering. Thank you very much for inviting Isimod to present our views and me personally. To answer your question, I would say that two important climate assessment reports that have been recently published that summarize the state of knowledge of climate over Hindu Kush Himalaya. One is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, commonly called the IPCC, Working Group 1, 2, and 3, 6th Assessment Report Cycle. And the other is Isimod's own Hindu Kush Himalayan Monitoring and Assessment Program, HIMAP reports. These two reports are very comprehensive. Several hundred scientists across the globe contribute to these reports and are very detailed to go into details on say individual areas over HKH or Bhutan in particular. But basically, the IPCC Working Group 1 report already shows that the world has warmed by 1.1 degrees C, and this implies also based on our HIMAP assessment that the HKH region has already warmed more than this, more than 1.1 due to elevation dependent warming. Okay. When we talk about HKH, there is great variability across eastern, central, and western Himalayas. Okay, so it's hard to generalize what's happening across HKH. But despite technical details and thousands of pages of assessment reports, IPCC and the HIMAP report both have short fact sheets that are easy to read over on mountains, which I encourage everyone to go to the webpage and look at it. Science has always had difficulty communicating to general public and policymakers, and to address this, we've tried to have simple sentence with confidence levels to convey our state of knowledge about any particular topic. So there are statements that scientists in the assessment based on consensus make on whether it's high confidence, medium confidence, or low confidence. So there's many individual elements that we have high confidence about, but there are also areas where we need to improve our science and evidence base. That's one. The other point I want to make is, over HKH, there's examples of unusual weather patterns, extreme weather, and related hazards, cryosphere change, as we've heard from the snowman racers, changes in ecosystems, they're all around us. Okay. Whether one particular event is due to increased greenhouse gases leading to global warming and changing climate, you could debate that whether it's due to climate change, but there's no debate on the impact on the economic side and human well-being based on these adverse impact, events that are happening now. So it's real, we need to, change these or do actions to protect these adverse impact happening now. In terms of projections, from the global assessment and the HIMAP assessment, temperature is likely rising across the Hindu Kush Himalaya, eastern, western, and central. Precipitation is projected to increase with medium confidence while bringing a myriad of precipitation-related challenges such as floods and landslides. With increasing temperature, glacial melt will continue to decline in the coming decades. Again, we have high confidence on that, which has severe implications on water availability and water security. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhupesh, for enlightening us in terms of the overall changes expected over the Hindu Kush Himalayan mountains, and also on the work that the messaging that is there also in HIMAP, which is a report that focuses on our region, which would be very useful for communication of the key messages. Now let's move to in terms of the work that's being done in Bhutan. So we have the National Center for Hydrology and Meteorology that also does climate projections and assessments on what happens in Bhutan. So I'd like to invite Dr. Singye to share some of the work that they're doing and the findings that are of concern to Bhutan.
Thank you, Chile. First, I will start with, depending on the availability of time, maybe I can discuss briefly 2 to 3 impacts of climate change that are of major concern to Bhutan. First is, as we have heard from many eminent speakers earlier today, on the impact of climate change on glaciers and the associated risks of glacial lake outburst flood. Bhutan is home to over 700 glaciers and 567 glacial lakes in altitude ranging from 4,000 to 7,000 meters. All our snowman race runners have actually had a first-hand experience of all these, some of these glaciers. Glaciers worldwide, as you know, are retreating, and Bhutan is no exception. From the studies conducted by our office on the 2 benchmark glaciers, our Bhutan glaciers are retreating at the rate of 10 to 15 meters per year, and the surface area of the glaciers are also decreasing. As you have heard also that Bhutan has 17 potentially dangerous glacial lake, and we have had several GLOF events in the past, in 1994, 2009, 2015, and also recently in 2019 also we had a minor GLOF event. And the GLOF events, actually our office has set up early warning systems are in place, but the threat from a glacial lake outburst flood is very real. And the 1994 GLOF event that we heard other eminent speakers talk about, we could possibly see a glacial lake that is maybe 2 or 3 times even bigger than the 1994 GLOF event. The second impact of climate change in Bhutan is on the increase of extreme weather events. Global average temperature is already 1 degree warmer than the pre-industrial level, and the last 7 years are the hottest years on record. Globally, as you know, the extreme weather events are on the rise, and that trend is also true for Bhutan. And I'll just discuss a few of the major events that happened in the last few years. In 2019, a 3-month-long above normal temperature has caused a minor GLOF event. Last year in June, a massive landslide has claimed the lives of 10 Highlanders in Laya. And August, as some of the speakers have mentioned, one flash flood has washed away a culturally important hot spring in Gaza. And October last year, we had post-monsoon rainfall that has caused damage to harvest across the country. So even the winter last year we had 5 or 6 times unprecedented, very heavy snowfall event was observed. And this year also we had several extreme weather events on floods, landslides that has claimed lives and caused damage to properties. One of the hottest day in Bhutan was observed in May of this year. So these kind of extreme weather events are on the rise because of climate change. And then there are other impacts also, like the changing patterns of rainfall, the impacts on agriculture, and among others. Thank you, Julie.
Plus, thank you, Dr. Singela. So we've heard about, in terms of the changes we can expect. So we are hearing about warming, which is happening all across the Himalayas. There's some variations across from the east to west. We are in the eastern Himalayas. And then the changes is warmer, is taking place faster in the mountains than in lower elevations. It's a curious phenomenon that happens. And then we've heard in terms of impacts of extreme events, then the increasing risk of the glacial lake outburst flood. So this is that is going to happen, might happen in Bhutan, in terms of the projections. So the next, we would like to now, knowing this, ask Mr. Som Dage from the NEC, which is the agency responsible for coordinating climate change action and policy in Bhutan. So in terms of what Bhutan is going to do, so for Dage, so what is Bhutan, the government, doing in terms of knowing that these changes are happening and it's projected to get worse? What are we doing in Bhutan?
Thank you. Firstly, as we are all aware, under the visionary and far-sighted leadership of our monarchs, Bhutan has always demonstrated exemplary leadership in terms of environmental protection and conservation. And even before the widespread call for climate action, we have committed to maintain 60% of our land under forest cover for all times to come. And forest, as we know, is a very important sink for the carbon emissions. And also in 2009, the Royal Government of Bhutan has committed to remain carbon neutral, recognizing the seriousness and the urgency to reduce carbon emissions. And this is actually a very huge commitment from a small, least developed country, which has actually played no role in the current changing climate that we are experiencing at the moment. And towards achieving our goal of maintaining carbon neutrality, Bhutan has put forth our detailed plans and strategies to pursue a low emission development pathway. So most recently, we have submitted our nationally determined contributions, which outline how we would pursue a low emission development pathway across all the sections of the economy. And also, we have developed low emission development strategies for sectors wherein the emissions have been growing as we progress socioeconomically over the years. For instance, we have developed low emission development strategies for the transport sector, for the industrial sector, and as well as for the agriculture sector. And these are the actions that we have actually undertaken in terms of reducing emissions, while our emissions are, compared to global emissions, less than 2.5% of the total global emissions. What is much more urgent and of much more concern is that being in a fragile mountainous ecosystem, as highlighted by the speakers earlier, there is much more need for us to build our adaptive capacity to a changing climatic system. So in doing so, we have taken proactive measures in terms of accessing financing from the international climate financing sources, as well as starting programs of actions to build resilience across all the sectors and all the sections of the societies to the adverse impacts of climate change. For instance, through the National Adaptation Program of Action, we have secured funds to actually reduce risks from glacial lake outburst floods, and also in building resilience of our food systems and infrastructures to the extreme weather events, weather and climate events. And we will soon be finalizing the long-term national adaptation plan in plan. While we are grateful for the support that we have received thus far from the international community in terms of formulating plans and also in piloting actions to reduce vulnerability of our communities to a changing climatic system, we would still call for more support and more enhanced support from the international communities to make sure that we fulfill the pledges of pursuing a carbon neutral development and also making sure that we build a robust low carbon economy and a society, harmonious society that is resilient to a changing climatic system. So these are some key actions that we have taken in terms of combating climate change in Bhutan. Thank you.
Thank you, Taki, on this. So we heard briefly in terms of the actions that Bhutan is taking. So what I heard here was we have taken bold steps in declaring that we will be carbon neutral. We have the 60% forest cover. And now there's more concern that we have to deal with the impacts. So the earlier also messages we heard is that we didn't create the emissions that is causing climate change, but we are facing the impacts of climate change. So the impacts are local, while the emissions are global. So we need more support in that, is what I'm hearing. So now, in terms of that, let's shift gear towards our speaker, Silarta from UNDP, and hear about, in terms of internationally, what sort of support is there. I think last month, the UNDP recently launched the 2022 Human Development Report. It was titled Uncertain Times, Unsettled Lives, Shaping a Future in a Transforming World. So this is in these uncertain times of accelerating climate, conflict, biological pandemics, and economic concerns. So Srilata, I hope you're online. If you can share with us in terms of some of the key findings of the HDR report 2022, and also if you can share with in terms of what sort of support the UNDP and the UN at large can provide to countries like Bhutan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well. Firstly, Your Majesty, distinguished guests, I'm very honored to be part of this climate conclave and to be in the presence of such inspiring speakers, partners, the snowmen racers, and truly an embodiment of the collective spirit and action that's required to face the challenges we do locally and globally. Let me also thank the Royal Government of Bhutan for hosting, Her Majesty for introducing the summit, and the convening partners, WWF and the National Environment Commission. I just wanted to start by acknowledging what the last couple of speakers emphasized and to commend the government and the people on the efforts towards combating climate change, truly a beacon across the world for a country that is aiming to be and is a world's carbon sink and spearheading many of the environmental initiatives. And it is with great credit, again, what was just mentioned, that Bhutan remains committed to its carbon neutrality, as was manifesting in its NDC and pursuing the low emission development strategies. So, and UNDP is very, very proud to be standing by the government and the people for this work. Now, coming to the question, indeed, UNDP's latest Human Development Report, as you mentioned, the Uncertain Times, Unsettled Lives, does focus and put a lens on how the uncertainties and inequalities around the world are reinforcing each other and to drive further polarization and undermining our sense of agency, control on our lives. The report particularly points to 3 sources of uncertainty that compound to unsettle the lives and, in fact, jeopardize the progress countries have made across the world. And these are around the planetary change, of course, climate change and the broader interactions it has with human inequalities, a radical shift towards how we organize our societies at a scale that was last seen when we moved from sort of agrarian societies to industrial societies, and finally intensification of political and social polarization across and within countries. And there's an intersection of these changes that are increasing economic and social turmoil, and of course with the ripple effects of the war in Ukraine, which are further amplifying what's been an ongoing pandemic crisis. And UNDP projects that the cost of living crisis in terms of the food and fuel price spikes has impoverished over 70 million people in just the first 3 months of the conflict. So one of the key findings from the report, therefore, is that this growing global turmoil has led to an unprecedented sort of regression, in fact, and reversals in much of the human development progress made. And the pandemic, compounded by the inequalities, the mistrust, the climate shocks, the rapid technological change, it has really jeopardized human development and human progress. And between 75 to 95 million people were tipped into poverty because of the pandemic. Now, the HDR also, of course, points to ways to navigate these uncertainties and specifically points to 3 I's: the investment, insurance, and innovation. And of course, when the HDR was launched, there was a talk of a 4th I and something we all need to keep in mind about inclusivity as we look to the future and as we invest now for a better future. And these range from investments from renewable energy and transition to pandemic preparedness and how we cope with extreme events, insurance and how we prepare our societies, including social protection mechanisms, for instance, and preparing for contingencies, social, economic, cultural innovation, and a resiliency that allows us through this innovation to continue to face uncertainties that surely will evolve. And in terms of how UNDP is coming in to support, both in terms of the short-term response and recovery, but a look at a long-term development horizon. For instance, methodologies and tools to support evidence-based policy and decision-making. UNDP was supporting many governments as they looked at socioeconomic assessments to inform green stimulus packages, for instance. And especially in this, we all know the disproportionate impacts of climate change and many of these crises. So convening inclusive policy dialogue with all levels and the whole of society is represented is really important. And of course, finally, programmatic support and some of the efforts Bhutan has made, and that was just mentioned by the speakers. We stand by helping countries, communities catalyze and implement solutions, and especially integrated solutions given the multifaceted and intersecting challenges that are there. For instance, adaptation solutions that can amplify development benefits, energy solutions that promote productive use, health, security, safety, nature-based solutions that could promote jobs, for instance. And these are some of the efforts that UNDP is supporting across the country, in Bhutan and the region, and across the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Srilata, for telling us a little bit about the key findings in the HDR report. So in terms of the uncertainties and how we can move forward with the 3 I's in terms of insurance, investment, and innovation in preparing for the future uncertainties. So now let's move on to, in terms of another support, we have Bhutan for Life, which is an innovative financing mechanism for climate change. And this works with the protection of nature, securing resilience against climate change. So we have Dr. Pema. Could you tell us a little bit about how important nature is for fighting climate change, and more particularly how the financing mechanism in this regard helps? So with regards to how Bhutan for Life can help Bhutan for Life fight climate change.
Thank you. Nature is indeed plays a key role in combating or addressing the climate change. And when we talk about nature in broad sense, nature encompasses all the natural environment. And now just to think of that, Bhutan is exposed to the Himalayan, to the 2 extreme climate events like the monsoon season from June to September, and then we have the dry period over the next 8 months. So now you can imagine that the nature plays a very important role in regulating the flash floods, erosion control, the clean air that we breathe in, the clean water that we drink are all the benefits of nature. And now when we take care of this nature using these management options to maintain and manage the nature, it becomes a nature solution for fighting against the climate. So Bhutan for Life, with the blessing of His Majesty the King, with the Royal Charter, it's a project finance for permanence, specifically to maintain the robust network of protected areas that contributes to biodiversity conservation, human well-being, and increase the resilience of Bhutan's resilience to the effects of climate change. So if you look at some of the activities that Bhutan for Life, where we need the financing mechanisms to fight against the climate change. One very pertinent example is like drying of water sources. It's a very pertinent issue and the challenge that we are facing in the Himalayan, the fragile Himalayan regions. If you look the recent the assessment on the water sources mapping, around 6,555 water sources were mapped in Bhutan, and out of that, around 2,317 water sources are drying. It's about 35%. And then about 147 water sources have been dried up recently. So these are some of the very pressing issues that we are facing. So Bhutan for Life is actually working towards all this, mitigating those challenges that we are facing. And similarly, like we can live without the fossil fuels. We can turn back to the electric and clean transportation systems and so on. But we cannot live without the water. So these are some important things that we need to look at. And the next is the Bhutan for Life is also looking at maintaining the extent and the quality of the protected area systems in Bhutan that encompasses 1.4% of the total land area under the protected area systems. And that ensures that at the end of 14-year period, 35.2 million tons of carbon equivalent will be sequestered. And Bhutan for Life works towards maintaining that 51.4% area under the protected area system for perpetuity by sustaining the financing mechanisms. The other activities that we are looking at is promoting the rural alternative energy technologies such as biogas and the solar household solar panels. And recently we established 80 kilowatt PV solar plant at Ajane. So that benefits about 35 households, and which also helps benefits around 1,500 pilgrimage visiting that area annually. So these are something that we are working towards that. And not only that, we are also looking at the alternative economic enterprises development through the non-wood forest product enterprise development, through ecotourism developments. And these are something that we are working towards. And Bhutan for Life is timely that we were able to secure funds. I think we talk about the strategies, we talk about the policies, and we talk about the research findings. And now this is Bhutan for Life is where we are implementing those plans we are putting forward to make it visible. So with the gracious funding support from the donor supports, the Green Climate Fund, WWF, international private donors, we all come together to fight against combating the climate change. I think Bhutan for Life is now here to finance those things, and I'm sure that in future more of such financing mechanisms are necessary to fight against the climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pema. So Bhutan for Life is focusing on the protected areas, and I think the snowman race went through 2 national parks up in the northern half in the highlands, like Jimmy National Park and Wanshu Centennial Park. So they are working now all the global concerns to the local realities and the national strategies. And what we heard from UNDP also in terms of investments and innovation, I think we're seeing some of those being translated into action at the local level. So this is where it matters, at the communities, where the people are facing the brunt of the impacts of climate change. So it's good to hear about that. So now let's go back again to the virtual panelists. So Silata and Bhupesh. Can you maybe think about and tell us what will be the biggest challenges and opportunities? I think climate change be most, I think also not usually about challenges and negative impacts, but there may be opportunities also, if you can actually turn a bad thing into an opportunity. What are the biggest challenges and opportunities for Bhutan and the Hindu-Kush Himalaya region? So we'll go with Bhupesh first. If Bhupesh, you can share your thoughts on this.
Sure. Thank you, Tinley. So this section is about science policy practice and how can, the state of science, the knowledge that we know, inform impact, adaptation, and, risk assessments. So for this, the IPCC Working Group 1, which is all about science, developed a framework called Climatic Impact Drivers. And you can learn more about it. This is chapter 12 of the Working Group 1 report. The climatic impact driver framework adopted in IPCC report allows for assessment of changing climate conditions that are relevant for sectoral impacts and risk assessments, thereby taking scientific evidence moving forwards for impact assessment and risk. CIDs are physical climate system conditions, example means events, extreme events that affect an element of society or ecosystems and are thus a priority for climate information provision. The challenge is that there is very less information about CIDs across HKH and Bhutan in the IPCC or other global assessments. Challenge is also in that the scientific and academic community need to address this information and knowledge gap. At the same time, it's an opportunity once we generate this science, this framework as intended will allow policymakers sectoral impacts and risk assessment for climate resilient development. So I see, how do we take the complicated science and, put it in a framework that allows for adaptation and mitigation action for a climate resilient development. Thanks.
Bhupesh, that's, I guess, the biggest challenge in terms of making some of the dry science understandable by the general public so we get wider support. Silata, can you share also in terms of what you think are the biggest challenges and opportunities?
Thank you, Tinley. Yes, indeed. I mean, I think the challenges that we discuss also present in themselves opportunities for change. A couple of these have been mentioned already, water especially, so talking about flood risk, especially in drainage basins and the availability of water, and magnified by, of course, increased the variability, changing land use, melting glaciers I mentioned. And so the water challenges, of course, closely linked to agriculture productivity and food security, that I think from a sectoral perspective would be an important one. A second is increased urban vulnerability in Bhutan, especially with Thimphu, Phuentsholing, Paro growing rapidly. There is an increasing demand in areas that are already under stress from climate change, and these stresses are magnified by the other stresses that come with it that are not necessarily from climate change. When we talk about health, water supply, and drainage, and the intersections of those have a huge impact, but I'll also come to the opportunity in what that is in terms of the change we need to look for. A third one, again, really securing the financial resources, the capacities to implement solutions at scale. There is a vast amount needed. Bhutan's second NDC, in fact, estimates it to be over 3.5 billion to implement the activities that the government has prioritized in the low emission development strategies in forest conservation. Now, there are opportunities in this, as I said, and UNDP has been working with partners to really help Bhutan take advantage of this. And there's a few I'd like to highlight. The first, of course, as I alluded to earlier, in light of what HDR also points to, is to really advance integrated cross-cutting solutions that connect the dots between, for example, land use, agriculture, and livelihoods, clean energy, economic growth, and social development. disaster reduction, risk reduction, climate services, and adaptation. And a couple of examples come to mind: Bhutan's solar power plant at Rubesa, or the replacement of the fossil fuel-based cars with electric taxis. And these contribute not only to the mitigation objectives, but also energy security, powering livelihoods, creating green jobs. Another was also mentioned, the UNDP-supported Napa 3 project, benefits for both people and the planet, sustainable land management, climate resilient irrigation, improved forest management, and it has strengthened the livelihoods of more than 100,000 people, almost half of them women. And nature has also been a beneficiary with, tigers, musk deer, snow leopards now sighted in the protected areas. A second opportunity is around using sort of the economic recovery from COVID to transition to a more green economy. Many countries, as I mentioned, have suffered setbacks, but as we build back forward and better, we need to embrace more of the cross-cutting solutions that look at long-term recovery, resilience, and green growth. And the third is around urban resilience. As a microcosm of what the country is facing and the cross-cutting issues that play out at the urban level, there's an important opportunity in terms of strengthening urban planning and governance and climate resilient development, from managing flood risks and climate stresses on water to building technology and entrepreneurship and jobs. Is truly a multi-dimensional approach, and one we are supporting the government explore with the potentially funding from LDCF. Finally, just around forging new partnerships, and we cannot, and no country or community or actor can do this alone. And the collective action we see here today, the spirit we see here today is important. So opportunities, for instance, in biofin, and which has identified ecotourism as a key solution, potentially generating over 100 million annually. The Bhutan sustainable low emission urban transport system. The national adaptation planning process that Bhutan is undertaking, again with support from UNDP and partners. Now, while bilateral, multilateral funding can come in, it's also time to really think about innovative funding mechanisms, unlocking private capital, redirecting that into low emission climate resilient development. And so there are a lot of opportunities in being able to translate a lot of these priorities into climate action and aligned with the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you, Srilata. So we heard a lot of, I think, ideas in terms of not just challenges, but also opportunities on how we can move forward. Maybe I'll take a quick question in terms of Bhutan has shown leadership. I think there's a lot being done. Is there more that we need to do? I'd like to ask Dr. Pema, do you think, is there more that we can do or should we do?
Definitely Bhutan is already doing enough. That in terms of the management, I think we have all the management options that we're actually gearing towards fighting against the climate change. For example, the parks, outside parks, sustainable management, community forests, more than 800 community forests, the Ramsar sites, international wetland of international importance. So there are so many things that Bhutan already did. And I think now what we need to do is that we need to really scale up, as mentioned by the earlier speakers. Like, we need to really look at the alternative energy. We need to transform, we need to the transportation sectors. And also we need to look at the diversifying the livelihood options to fight against that. And more than that, I think we need to develop global conservation and development agenda to empower the mountain people for more inclusive and sustainable development. And the last one, I think what we can do is that we really need to look at the financing mechanism that need to be put into place so that the action can be actually implemented on the ground. So the financing mechanism need to be actually secure for the biodiversity and ecosystem services that we are already doing a lot. So I think there are a lot of potential that we actually can get towards securing those funds, and then we can do more to show to the world that Bhutan is really a champion in managing and also implementing the actions that being drafted.
Thank you, Lars. So now let me move over here to this table and ask Sonam Tage, since the NEC leads the Bhutan's delegation to the climate negotiations, and we are expected to graduate from our classification as a least developed country pretty soon. And Bhutan has been playing a big role in the LDC group, most recently as the chair of the LDC group in the negotiations. And as we graduate, how can we continue to gather support in achieving our targets? And is maybe now the snowman race is about mountains and mountain communities. Is that something that we can leverage to continue in terms of mobilizing a collective voice in raising our concerns?
Thank you. Graduating from the LDC is actually a sign that we are making a lot of progress and in a better position than we are at the moment. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that we are in a better position to combat the challenges posed by a changing climatic system, because the impacts are becoming much more intense and more frequent, and it's anticipated to get worse in the future. So as an LDC under the UN Climate Convention, we had the privilege of having the collective voice of 49 LDC countries, pushing for common needs and means to address the challenges and risks posed by the changing climate system. And we will no longer be part of that voice once we graduate from the LDCs. And also we will lose our flexibilities provided to the LDCs and the SITs under the Convention and the Paris Agreement. However, fragile mountain ecosystems are recognized as particularly being vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So events such as the snowman race highlight the importance and the attention that is needed to make sure that the mountain regions are more resilient and has the adaptive capacity to adapt to a changing climatic system. So as such, there are many mountain countries and regions across the world sharing similar vulnerabilities and feeling the impacts much more than the rest of the world. So in order to be able to raise a collective voice for the mountains, it would be important for the mountain countries to come together and raise our voice as a common collective voice of the mountain regions to draw more attention and bring in more support towards ensuring that the mountain regions are adaptive. The adaptive capacity of the mountain regions are actually built to a changing climatic system. So this is one thing that we, going forward after we graduate from the LDC, that we would need to consider is that bringing the LDC, the mountain countries together and raising a collective voice as a mountain from the mountains. Thank you.
Thank you, Thagela. I think that sounds like a very important message, I guess, we can take forward, especially from the snowman race and as we graduate from the LDCs. So towards now, to conclude, to wind up, maybe we can all ask the panelists if you can share one message to take towards COP. It's coming up soon. So let's start from Dr. Pema, if you can start very briefly in 30 seconds.
I think it is important that we should keep working towards achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. I think we need to do more. And then I think the industrialized and the developed countries should also take responsibility to support the vulnerable countries and the marginalized communities, those are affected by the climate effects. So I think we need to really act and then put forward that with the support of the financing mechanism, I think we can do a lot. So for COP27, I think we need to really work hard to work together. The developing and the underdeveloped countries should be working together to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement.
Thank you, Dr. Singh.
Countries like Bhutan continue to face the impacts of climate change. Access to climate finance is more urgent than ever to help vulnerable countries, adapt to climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's go over to our virtual participants. Let's go to Kathmandu, Bhupesh.
Thanks. I would say that global climate change is unequivocal. There are global scale processes and impacts due to increased greenhouse gases. However, there are regional variations and drivers. One good example would be the short-lived climate forces. So I would, submit that we need to understand our regional drivers and work regionally to address them. ECMOD has put out a HKH call to action, and we're grateful for government of Bhutan's support on it. We hope to receive continued support and help from the government in amplifying the message at COP27. Thanks.
Thank you. Srilata, can you share a message?
Thank you. And for UNDP, the upcoming COP really is an opportunity to advocate for scaled up investment in climate action. And as the UN Secretary General emphasized, the balance between mitigation and adaptation, for instance. So one key strategic priorities for COP27 is to really bring the NDCs of the countries to life through scaled up investment, reinforcing the importance of multilateralism and collective action for climate action and sustainable development. And just wanted to close by saying UNDP is absolutely committed to continue to work closely with Bhutan to accelerate climate action capacities from long-term planning to building coalitions for transformative investments and building partnerships for technology and innovation as well. And the stakes are high ahead of the COP. And I think for us, having an ambitious outcome that protects the people on the planet, especially those at the front lines as has been showcased in this event, is absolutely critical. And there's a lot of work to be done, but I'm also an optimist, and I think we can accomplish a lot by working together. So thank you very much, and Pashidala.
Thank you. So last, Dagi, one message.
I'll be very crisp. For Bhutan, we have the plans and strategies in place to combat the issues of climate change. Now, what we require is we need support to translate these plans and strategies into actions that will give us tangible benefits and results, and we need that much more urgently and much more immediately. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So thank you to all our panelists for sharing diverse range of experiences and ideas. So to sum up, what I've gathered is that we do have everything we need to take action. We have the policy, we have the science information just now, the certainty is increasing, the confidence in terms of what's happening is increasing. We have our plans, as we just heard just now, and what we need is actually translating this into action. And that includes scaling up our activities. That requires also the finance, and I think this is a call out to the international community as well, which is also, I think, clearly reflected in the NDCs that we have already submitted from Bhutan. So I think that's what I gather from here. So thank you to all our panelists for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tilley, and to all our panelists for another round of insightful discussion on climate change, particularly on the challenges, opportunities, and the actions needed to be taken by Bhutan and other mountainous countries in the region to become climate resilient. With this, we have now reached the final segment of the conclave, the closing session. And no climate conclave, for that matter, any conclave is complete without a call for action. So we have Mr. Sonampi Wangdi, Secretary of National Environment Commission Secretariat, presenting the expectations and call to action statement from this conclave.
Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, as we come to the end of the Bhutan Climate Action Conclave, firstly, let me join the former speakers in congratulating all our athletes of the snowman race. Let me also thank you all for being our voices and ambassadors for climate actions. The strength, endurance, perseverance, and dedication you have shown in this race is a clear message to the global community that where there is a will, there is a way. What is critical at this juncture is the commitment, political will, and global solidarity to address climate change. As you have raced against time, the communities across the world, especially the vulnerable communities in Bhutan, are racing against devastating impacts from climate change. Today, we sit on a fast ticking time bomb, and the sense of urgency is even more compelling. We have heard from our runners their first-hand account of stories on how climate change has impacted our people, our mountains, and our glaciers. Some of our athletes even witnessed and are victims of climate calamities. Increased incidences of flash floods and windstorms, erratic rainfall and sudden downpours, declining water availability are now a common phenomenon. Our mountains are fast turning gray from white. Science is robust and clear. It tells us that to achieve the Paris Agreement goal of limiting the global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, global emissions need to be halved by 2030, and the world must achieve net zero emissions by 2050. But currently, we are grossly off track, with current policies heading towards warming of 3 degrees Celsius or more by end of the century. The assessment carried out by IC Mode also tells us that Hindu Kush Himalayan glaciers will melt by 1/3 even if global temperature rises limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and possible downstream devastation due to glacial lake outburst floods. This means millions of people who rely on these glaciers for drinking water, sanitation, agriculture, and hydroelectric power will be exposed to climate-induced calamities such as floods, landslides, droughts, heat waves, tropical cyclones, irreversible biodiversity loss, famine, and many more. Already, even at just 1 degree of warming, the impacts are devastating. This year alone, across our region, we were grappling with unusually heavy monsoon rains, the worst seen in decades. Weeks of downpours caused floodings and landslides in our countries, killing people and affecting lives and livelihoods. The devastation caused by recent floods in Pakistan is unimaginable. 2 weeks ago, we also lost 5 lives and livelihoods at the Jasabi village in Thumsi Dzongkha due to flash floods. Ladies and gentlemen, what we fail to understand is Bhutan has always been a responsible global citizen with impeccable credentials in environmental and biodiversity conservation. We have committed to remain carbon neutral, and our pathways to development have always been green and inclusive. Yet, we are among the hardest hit. The most vulnerable countries are at the front line of climate crisis. As a nation highly dependent on climate-sensitive sectors like hydropower and agriculture, adaptation and resilience are a priority and key to combat climate impacts. We have limited capacities to deal with the existential climate crisis, which has further compounded by the global COVID-19 pandemic. Therefore, we call upon major economic leaders to ramp up the support for climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, lastly, before concluding, I would like to highlight a few key messages that must reverberate at COP27 and CBD COP15. Bhutan, despite its impeccable environmental credential, remains highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. However, Bhutan is ready for climate action on the ground. The climate change policy of the Kingdom of Bhutan 2020 and our second nationally determined contribution lays down clear plans and strategies of low carbon, climate resilient development pathway in line with 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Agreement. What is critical for us today is climate finance to support our ambition, realize our commitment, and to build resilience. Climate finance is key to leverage climate action and should be grant-based, easily accessible, predictable, sustainable, and scalable. Climate finance committed by developed countries must be made available today. Further, climate financing must be complemented with transfer of transformative green technologies which are environmentally sustainable, disaster resilient, and contribute to green development. We need the global community to support our resolve. All countries must set ambitious targets to keep 1.5 degree within reach. Climate change has no boundaries. Each one of us must play our part depending on our respective capabilities. Therefore, as we have come together for the snowman race today, global community must come together to address climate change. Global support and solidarity is the only way to resolve the climate emergency. We have only one planet and all must act together to save this planet. Thank you and Tashidele.
May I thank Secretary Sonampi Wongdi for the very powerful message for global support and solidarity that we urgently need to combat climate change. And finally, may I invite Mr. Doji Dodrul, Director General of Tourism Council of Bhutan and board member of the Snowman Race, to present the concluding remarks and close Bhutan Climate Action Conclave 2022.
Her Majesty the Gelsin, Honorable Foreign Minister, Excellencies, distinguished participants, and the 29 climate warriors, ladies and gentlemen. Kuzu Zongpola and I humbly offer my warm and happy greetings to all. The inaugural Snowman Race, the ultimate race for climate action, was successfully launched, and now the maiden Snowman Race Climate Conclave is also concluding. Therefore, a big congratulations and gratitude to all those who have been part of Bhutan's latest contribution to the world's war against climate change. Although we are a small nation, under the visionary leadership of our beloved kings, Bhutan has always tried to think and act differently, and also think globally and act locally. We have always tried to put environment at the front and the center of everything that we do, and the Snowman Race has been no different. We believe the Snowman Race, an ultra-marathon across one of the world's highest highlands, and for a climate cause by 29 world-class athletes from 11 countries, is not a regular idea. This race had a global media coverage. It has been covered in some of the world's biggest and best media outlets, meaning that the eyes of the world have been on the runners and on Bhutan for the past week. These media outlets have not only covered the runners and the race itself, but have also covered why the race is being held in the first place, specifically to highlight the urgent necessity to raise the awareness of climate change on the fragile mountain ecosystems. And this climate conclave is the icing to the cake to reinforce and highlight the Snowman Race ambitions on climate action. I believe the inaugural Snowman Race and the maiden climate conclave will go down in the history as a harbinger of a great climate actions and positively the start of a new era for a real climate action. It was only a few weeks ago that Bhutan unveiled the new brand for our nation, which aims to launch Bhutan into future by demonstrating an evolution and a spirit of optimism. destined to inspire pride and spark the imaginations of our own citizens and our guests. Our new brand, under the tagline of Believe, is designed to be bold, vivid, richly storied, and utterly distinctive, rebranding it for a new future, both for our people and our visitors. Our athletes confirms that the snowman race is exactly that. It is bold, it is vivid, it is full of stories, and it is distinctive. In concluding, may I humbly propose 5 actions for consideration. Firstly, let's believe that the snowman race has the potential to be a huge asset not only for Bhutan, but also the world, generating global interest from the world's best athletes and who are also climate change advocates. Second, let's believe that the Climate Conclave is a forerunner to an action-driven World Climate Summit, drawing world's leaders and climate action advocates and practitioners to give form and life to the royal vision of the World for Life, a global tool to heal and nurture our Mother Earth and save our entire species from extinction, in the wise words of the dinosaurs at the UN. Third, let's believe in education and in our children, educating the next generation on how we must adapt to this changing world in going to be a key factor in how we manage the climate crisis and ensure the future generations do not suffer due to present-day inaction. Fourth, let's believe in adaptation as the front and the center of all climate change conversations. The time we could hope to halt or manage the changes to the rising global temperatures and consequences of those rises have now passed. Instead, let's rethink on how we use our resources, water, fertile soils, especially to start putting into place the infrastructure for renewable energy. Fifth and the last, let's believe in the community ownership and engagement playing a bigger role in this war against climate change. While doing so, the frontline communities should also enjoy a direct and immediate benefits from the climate action intervention. So it is about change, but not only climate change. Rather, it is now more important is it changing our beliefs and behaviors. While change is inevitable, we can and we should design and drive the change in the way we want. And all we want is to heal our Mother Earth and pass it down to our children and grandchildren, a healthier Mother Earth. And the question is, do we even have a choice not to heal her? After all, we just have one Earth. And let me, on behalf of everyone here, producers, organizers, speakers, and the participants of Climate Conclave, and the 29 athletes who have now become climate action ambassadors, take this wonderful opportunity in submitting our deepest gratitude to Her Majesty, the Girl Queen, the Queen of Bhutan, the Royal Patron for Environment, for blessing this event with the golden words of wisdom. And please allow me to conclude on behalf of everyone by offering our humble gratitude to the golden throne of the Wangchuk dynasty, the Kingdom of Bhutan, for the priceless gift of snowman race, the ultimate race for climate action. President Rupa Gello, long live Wangchuk dynasty. Thank you and Rashid Alek.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it has been an honor for me to be